Was that how we start? Okay, sorry.
I mean, we
It's just,
can.
it's my. We can start like this. Let's start like this.
Wow.
Also have, dude. So earlier in the week, I was down sieging a keep with this. I was literally right outside the front door doing this as people come out the door to fight me,
No.
and then they did the
Fight
big
me,
die.
you coward!
All right. Tonight's floor talk is on the races of the Elder Scrolls. We have the Elven races and the creature races and the man races. And again, on tonight's lore talk, we have Battle Roar and Admiral Morkor.
As stickers.
Oh. Who's going to lead us off tonight?
I think Admiral's gonna lead the elf talk. I'm not really the biggest expert on elves. I know about them, and I know enough about them.
You
but
know
I don't know a
more
ton about them.
than you lead on about them.
Yeah, well, certain ones. It depends if they've ever had beef with the Nords. Or that know your enemy stuff.
Oh, you know what? That is true. So, we are going to start off with the Ultimer. Okay, the first folk. So,
Yeah, that's Altmer with a D. Altmer too.
yeah, and I can't
Because
say
those
it
were
right.
the original. Yeah, it's hard because of Altmer, Aldmer. He sounds like you're saying almost the same thing. But yeah, that's just Altmer like the high elves, but instead of a T, it's a D. Aldmer.
Long story short, we had this entire great war in the Dawn Age that we just literally talked about, like, last part. And the remnants of the Elnathay that wanted godhood turned into the Eldmer, or the first folk, and they were on this nice continent that theoretically probably didn't exist. And I guarantee you, did not exist. They probably just made it the entire thing up. But this is an elf person saying that, so. And that is where all elves came about. I am blanking on the name of their continent right now.
Old Maris. Old Maris.
Maris. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's
Maris.
supposedly where they came from.
It was supposedly to the south, because we know the Malmer are actually to the south as well, and the Malmer went north to find Pandania, or their continent, which we'll get to that.
Pandania. Which is cool, because we actually got a lot of lore about the Sea Elves in this game that we haven't had previously. The Malmer. There's a lot more. There's a lot more to them.
We didn't have any games really set in that general area of the world, so we haven't had the lore expanded in that area yet.
Well, we haven't had a game on that coast because they don't go as far north as Skyrim. And then Imperial City's obviously landlocked. Morrowind is the complete opposite side of the continent.
The only place I could see them attacking would be Leyawind, but that's just like as a short pirate siege to take loot. Yeah. And they don't really do that much pirating if you're a human. Yeah, so, like, they straight up hate the High Elves for kicking them off of Aldamaris.
Yeah, so essentially, Aldamaris was destroyed. Is how the lore goes, which is why the Aldmer left after they had already exiled the Malmer, which are your Sea Elves. Your Sea Elves are, I would say, probably some of the most skilled sailors in all of Tamriel. Right up there with with Redguard, like swordsmen like sailor swordsmen, like where they call them. There's a part of Red Guard society that are expert sailors, but I would say the Malmer are probably better because they almost live on the sea.
They
So
basically do, because those
yeah,
ships will literally not go back for years and years at a time.
hmm
Because they're constantly effing with all the elven races that they don't like.
yeah, and it's
And,
interesting because really they only have beef with the Ultimate now, the High Elves.
And they even have...
They won't pass up the chance to raid like Wood Elves and stuff, but they mostly jack with the High Elves.
They also, because the Malmer are just complete bullshit, can basically do what the Slowed do. So just ancient sea magic to make sure a hurricane just hovers across their entire continent so you can't land. Because they're just
Yeah,
like, you know
so-
what? Screw you. No landing for you.
We actually got to see some of that sea magic when we went to Galen a couple of updates ago. A couple of years ago now, I guess.
All the way back in the
about a year and a
day
half.
when this game came out, the Aldmeri Dominion starting zone actually had some of that sea magic happening as well. But it was hurricane magic and not actual sea magic, where they made a almost impenetrable wind barrier. And it's just like, they're powerful. If they wanted to, they could take over half of that continent easily.
The Sea Elves, the Malmer, are pretty powerful. So we saw in Galen, they actually were able to summon hurricanes to destroy ships and throw ships off course. We also learn from a Malmer we work with and from some of the lore and stuff that they can summon giant sea serpents, and some of them ride them as like mounts on the ocean.
Yeah, there's a lot of lore books about that too. They
Yeah,
also worship the serpents. So I guess that's where they got that idea from Starfield over there.
their High King, King Orgnum, is said, and you take this with a grain of salt, he's said to be the god Setikal, the world devouring serpent that the Red Guards worship.
Yeah.
That's actual lore. King Orgnum is thought to be Setikal because he has been alive since the Merethic era, and as of Skyrim, as far as I know, which is hundreds of years after this, he's still alive. Granted, elves are very long lived. They're not that long lived.
Unless you
you're talking
have
thousands and thousands and
Daedric
thousands of years.
magic in you.
Well, that's
You're not
different, 'cause
living
even-
that long.
Because
well, that was also part of the thing. When he lost his power, and part of his power in the making of Nirn, he took the form as his way to survive.
That is
this
also
Whereas
true.
Setikal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And then if you look at, this is also goes into the argument of why the Malmer believe them to be the true descendants, is, and the only difference between, like, if you look, the High Elves and the Malmer is their skin color, which was changed by their exile to their land. All right.
so
But arguably, they are way more powerful than the High Elves, and this is why they claim right to the lineage.
well, their magic, in my opinion, is a lot more powerful than High Elven magic because the fact that you can summon natural disasters like that, like, I know there are some mages in Tamriel who can do that, but that's like their baseline storm callers can summon hurricanes and thunderstorms and stuff. Like, that's where their baseline starts. And you look at Tamriel and you look at mages in Tamriel, their baseline starts infinitely lower than your entry level Malmer does. With some of your Malmer mages, your storm callers being able to actually single-handedly conjure hurricanes if they have the right conduits and stuff, like we see on Canarthy's Roost in this game during that quest line, like we see on Tempest Island with the dungeon in this game, like we see on Galen during that quest line, the fact that they can summon storms. There's one quest in the Galen quest line where he summons a storm in a cave. In a cave.
And there's only a set few High Elves that can even possess the same kind of magic. And the thing is, none of them are unknown because the Sigic Order has taken them. Because the Sigic Order finds that the Altmer are actually impure and do not follow the proper god. And they left as well. And that's why you have the Sigics over there, is because they believe in the old gods of the High Elves, where you had the division during right before the journey to Tamriel.
Mm-hmm. So talking about, now I guess we're getting into the High Elven side of things. The Aldmer become the Altmer. The Aldmer branch out, become the Altmer, become the Wood Elves, become the Chimer, which are the predecessors to the Dark Elves, and become the Orsimer eventually. But now we're kind of getting into High Elf and stuff with the Sigic Order. The Sigic Order specifically, you even look at their ranks, they don't carry some of the same beliefs that the High Elves do, even though most of them are made up of High Elves. The Sigic Order is mostly High Elves. There are other races, which shows they're more tolerant than the High Elves, because the High Elves are very purist.
They kind of split off at the exact same time of the Altimer becoming a thing.
Yes.
So it's kind of one of those things where they said, all right, we're not going to be doing this, but we're still High Elves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so...
it was... And if you look at why they left, it was because of the gods. It was because of the High Elves wanted to believe in the descendant gods versus the Sigics believing in the predecessor gods.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can even see that reflected in their magic. High Elves are very destruction-based most of the time in lore when you encounter a High Elf. They are very destruction-based magics. Granted, you have exemptions to that. Mana Marco being the main one.
Being just straight-up necromancy and conjuring.
But Mana Marco was also not a normal High Elf. He was a Sigic at one point before he got kicked out. That's something you gotta keep in mind, too, because he's pretty old as well.
He also had the ability to basically, if he wanted to, he could have conquered all of the elements of magic if he really wanted to. He just didn't, because he decided, I don't want to fight for myself. Necromancy, boom, fight for me.
Well, he attained lichdom. He did. I mean, he's one of the few people to obtain lichdom and not go crazy because of it. So that's some pretty powerful magic in and of itself as well. Obviously, with every race, you have your outliers. Even in a magical race like the High Elves, you'll have outlier children who are born who are incredibly gifted at magic. More so than normal High Elves, which most High Elves are very gifted at magic to begin with compared to all the other races. But then you have your exceptional kids. You have your Mana Marcos. You have your Vanis Galarians. You have your Sigics. People like that. So, mentioning Orgnum and the High Elves and the Sea Elves, we kind of need to start working our way inward toward the center of Tamriel. And the next ones I think we probably should talk about. Well, I was going to go Wood Elf first, because Ayleid gets pretty deep. You're working inward.
Yeah, that is
true.
You
have your Ayleids, or not your Ayleids, your Wood Elves, your Bosmer. Because they debate whether or not they actually came from the Altmer. Their creation story, but they are elves.
They might have actually came from Altmaris over as well.
They may, they may have came a lot longer ago though, because their creation myth talks about the ooze and the primordial stuff, with Ifray giving them form. Which Ifray, real quick recap on the god thing, is their chief deity, and they refer to him as the storyteller. In the here and the now. The Wood Elves live in the present. They don't plan for tomorrow and they don't worry about the past. That's what makes them unique. They're very in the moment. Also, some of the most gifted archers in all of Tamriel are Wood Elves. Funny, because they can't cut down trees in Valinor because of the Green Pact, but are some of the most naturally gifted archers in all of Tamriel. Hands down. It's not even close.
and one of the things that like that kind of help, it hurts and helps, is uh, and Admiral can talk more about it, is the travels of what's his name from the High
Topal the
Elves?
pirate.
Um,
Pilot.
there you go. The the travels of Topal the pilot, where he actually maps out Tamriel for the High Elves after they get to the Somerset Isle.
Is not only one of the first elves or people in history to actually discover Tamriel from a different continent, but to do something that not even a lot of people have done in the entire world in general, even in our world, which would be going around the entire continent in one trip. Because he would occasionally stop, but it'd be like, okay, cool, map that out, going back.
I want to bring up briefly, because we're going to talk about them later. Also, the first person to ever discover were Argonians, which proves that Argonians and the beast races predate humans and elves on Tamriel, which is cool.
He figured out the Khajiits were a thing.
Yeah.
He found Argonians.
And that's where the Khajiits may come from Bosmer, but the problem is, in his tales, he never found the Bosmer.
Yeah. So
that's the only thing. But it makes sense because they're more woodland than coastal.
One thing to keep in mind too when we're talking about the elven races, you have to throw in quite a large degree of racism, even more than the man races. Because I'd be fair to say that every elven race, besides maybe the wood elves, are very outsider not friendly. Dark elves are better nowadays. I mean, they still have the house dress though that enslaves people. Even the Orsmer are very. If you're not one of us, you're not welcome.
For the first half of their history, snow elves were actually like that before something made them just go completely insane.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get into that later when we talk about the snow elves and the Nords. So, but
the Bosmer, as for the Bosmer though, I feel the Green Pact makes them have to be more open to societies. Because they need trade. Yeah, they need the trade for the materials that they want to use.
I just wanted to throw that little thing in there at the end of the Topal, because Topal did map out all of Tamriel, but it was from an elven perspective. And if you read some of his writings, you'll see what I mean.
We always...
The humans are not much better, but...
When we ever say we're talking about High Elf writings, take it with a grain of salt that they are very much Puritans of themselves and think very highly.
It's also the High Elves like to rewrite history a bit.
Yeah. Also, just like we pointed out in the Gods video, the truth is most of the time somewhere in the middle. So. Yeah.
It's the same thing with the Dark Elves 9 times out of 10, where they like to rewrite history with the whole...
make themselves the heroes?
No, make themselves the gods thing that they tried to do.
Yeah. So back to the Bosmer real quick. We need to go over the Green Pact definitely, because that's what kind of defines Bosmer culture nowadays. So the Green Pact is they can't harm the trees or the plants of Valenwood. They were given Valenwood by Ifray to live, and they are not allowed to harm any of the plants or trees in Valenwood. As such, they have created some pretty cool magics that can manipulate nature without killing it. Where your Glenmoral Weird have nature magics, Bosmer have nature magics even more. So, a lot of Bosmer houses are magically created out of trees, without cutting the wood or harming the tree. They just make the tree grow a certain way where they live in it. Which is cool to see how that society's kind of adapted to not being able to tap into the main resource of the woods, which being the trees. They have tapped into it a different way. But the Green Pact is why Bosmer are big meat eaters, and you'll see a lot of bones and leathers in their armors and weapons and stuff. Because that's all they got. They can't use wood from Valenwood. They can use wood from other places, as long as it's not been chopped in Valenwood. Also, brief note before I turn it over to Adam, we'll talk a little bit more about it. Fungus. Fungus is not part of the Green Pact. So, Bosmeri alchemists will use different kinds of fungus in crazy ways that nowhere else uses.
And it
So,
so
that's
happens that most of the fungi or any of the flowers in any of these games are probably some of the more useful items for alchemy when it
Very
comes
much so.
to in lore. So they're kind of deadly if they go into that. Because I went back and played Skyrim, and most of those fungies had, like, damage health, lingering damage poison, and I'm just like, I forgot about this. Holy shit.
Yeah.
Now, I want to say one thing as a archer.
That's not even
usually,
limiting animal parts, too, because most of those can be used in that.
That's what I'm about to bring up, is as an archer in this game usually, the best bows in Tamriel lore come from the wood elf, and they are not made of wood.
Yeah, they're bone.
They are made of animal bone, and the different animal bones have different traits. Even their arrows have different bones for different things to do.
There's also a case of them using magic on it to basically make it even more deadlier.
Yeah, because when you talk about a race like the Wood Elves, magic isn't the first thing that comes to mind, because they're such a arboreal, archer-esque, ranger-esque race. But they have their mages, and their mages are pretty wild.
The magic inclined of the race allows them to make the weapon of the bow. And
with every race we're going to talk about when it comes to elves, all of them have some kind of magic inclination except for one. So I mean, it's just
okay.
being descended from Aldmer.
We can't count the Dremor. They literally said, "Hey, yo, you see that religion over there? Yeah, screw that."
I was talking about the Orsimer.
Science time, boys.
It is very rare that the Orsimer have a mage more than a month.
That is true.
That's more what I was talking about.
That is incredibly true.
Yeah. So after we do a little bit of the Bosmer here, do you have anything else to add to the Bosmer stuff? Bosmer, we know stuff about them, but we don't know a ton about them. We haven't explored their race really. We have all of Valenwood, but the storylines in Valenwood are very shallow. They go more toward the Dominion than the High Elf or the Wood Elf part of things.
We could also bring up part of the Green Pact in the Silvernar and the
Silvernar and the Green Lady. Yeah. That's essentially their rulers. They have kings, but everything runs through the Silvernar and the Green Lady. It's kind of like how England has a king and queen, but everything runs through their Congress, or whatever they call it over there. Same way with Valenwood. Valenwood will have a king and a royal family, but everything runs through the Silvernar and the Green Lady, because supposedly they are the most in tune with nature and with Ifrei. Ifrei's a big, big deity to the Wood Elves. Everything they do.
And if the Silvernar is killed, what will happen with the Green Lady?
In this game. Yes. The Silvernar is killed, the Green Lady follows. They're combined. They're a 2-in-1. They're different people, but they are soul linked,
there is
essentially.
also something that she has that happens. She goes in rage.
Yes.
The Green Lady goes enraged on a blood hunt until she gets her vengeance, and then
which is interesting because normally it's the other way around. Your men will go enraged when the woman dies, but if the Silvernar dies, the Silvernar's the peaceful one of that relationship in every single inclination of it. The Silvernar's the calm one, and the Green Lady is the one who is the vengeance of the forest. I think she's called at one point during the quest line. That talks about it.
When she is enraged, she is considered the vengeance of the forest.
Yeah. I almost forgot about them. I'm glad you brought that up, because those are very integral parts to Wood Elf society. And they have to have a Silvernar. They have to. So
it's one of those things. They have to have a Silvernar, and then they have to have a Green Lady.
Yeah. One cannot exist without the other, and Wood Elves cannot exist if they don't have one. So
and that was part of the pact.
Yes, that was part of the Green Pact, because the Silvernar is who communes directly with Ifrei.
Yeah.
So the Silvernar is also the only one who can okay a wild hunt, which is we probably should talk about that too real fast. So
That is one thing I wanted to talk about before moving
So-
on from them.
the Wild Hunt is something the Wood Elves can invoke. And this is why I tend to believe the Wood Elves when they say they were made from the primordial ooze from Ifray. Because when they invoke a Wild Hunt, they become this is something they only do when they have to do it. Because you don't live a Wild Hunt. You die after the Wild Hunt's completed. So, it's the ultimate sacrifice. You're dying if you do a Wild Hunt. But, they used it to fit.
A side note, a reason why the Nord would know about this is because
High King Rufrath invoked a Wild Hunt when he tried to invade him.
Yep.
And High King Rufrath was the one, for those of you who play Skyrim, the one who was buried with the Jagged Crown. They killed him so good, we didn't know where the Jagged Crown was. So, Wild Hunt, the forms they take, they're not animals, like you would think. Like, they're transforming into animals. Side note on that, werewolfism in Bosmer culture is frowned upon massively. Because that's shown as an affront to Ifray. Because Ifray gave them their form, they're supposed to keep their form as elves. But the Wild Hunt, they don't turn into just animals. They turn into amorphous creatures, is what the wiki describes it as. And they go into a blood hunt, essentially. And then once they complete their Wild Hunt, they turn on each other and destroy themselves. And then the Wild Hunt is complete. So no one lives a Wild Hunt. Their target doesn't live. They don't live. It's just a bad time for everyone. And just so you know, they bat 100 on those Wild Hunts too. They ain't never missed a target. So they're like a last-ditch effort, and man, they're good at it.
It's basically the, oh shit, we're about to lose. Okay, final plan, go. Type.
And not like just lose, like eradication level lose. But yeah, no, like eradication level, like they're gonna be cease to exist as a people. Lose. It's not like we lost that battle. We better invoke a Wild Hunt. No, it's our people are threatened to the point of extinction. We need to invoke a Wild Hunt to protect them because it's not taken lightly. Like I said, if they transform into other forms, it is an affront to Ifray. But Ifray gave them this ability to defend themselves. But as payment for it, they lose their lives. It's a big, big thing. It's not something they do willy-nilly.
No, they very rarely do it unless someone has encroached on their territory.
I think you can count the times in history of Tamriel a Wild Hunt has happened on one hand. Like that's in the thousands and thousands of years Tamriel has been around. You can count on one hand how many times a Wild Hunt has been invoked.
The same amount of dragon breaks and the same amount of Wild Hunt. Pretty much.
Yeah, so Werewolves are pretty brutal. They're very, very talented, though, in their own right. Just different than your normal Altimer and other Elven races. So now we should probably push into the heart and get to the lesser-known, more important race of the Heartland Elves. The old lovely aliens that people see remnants of everywhere, but probably don't know a whole lot about.
There is a lot of remnants of that. Like, genuinely.
Well, and funny enough, this is another race that technically Nords have had beef with, so I know quite a bit about the aliens as well. Nords themselves technically didn't, but Proto-Nords did, which we'll get into that later. Aliens, they're called the Heartland Elves. They are from the province of Cyrodiil nowadays. In Oblivion and in this game, there are remnants of alien culture everywhere. Everywhere. One thing that sets them apart from the normal elves of Tamriel, except for the Dark Elves, is they worship the Daedra. They did not worship the Aedra. And I'm not talking like, oh, the good Daedra, oh, Meridia. Well, there were some that worship Meridia. I'm talking about
literally every Daedra ever.
Well, most of the brutal ones that like Saint Alessia was under, they worship more like Baal and Mehrunes Dagon and very brutal Daedra. That's why one of the big things that is talked about in Cyrodiil, when you talk about lore with aliens in Cyrodiil, is the flesh gardens. The lovely flesh gardens they would make out of their slaves. Because they were bored and they just liked inflicting pain on people.
They said, hey, this would look pretty nice. Okay, it doesn't look nice, but you know what? Now it's there. Okay, you know what? Now it's looking pretty smithy. Alright.
So, most of them worshipped what we would consider the evil Daedra. There were some that worshipped Meridia. King, what was his name? Was it Lanimar, the last Ayleid?
Lanimar, yeah.
We see the last Ayleid in this game, actually, and he's not on Tamriel because Saint Alessia did a real good job of ending that crap. King Lelorian Dinar. Lelorian, not Lanar. Lelorian was born in the Niben Bay area as an Ayleid. And he was the last king of the Ayleids. He was a king of a Ayleid group that worshipped Meridia. And Meridia saved him from Saint Alessia's wrath. The only one that was saved. But we know a lot about the Ayleids, but most of it's through the lens of the Imperials. So like with everything else, we kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. But we do know they were pretty bad. Pretty bad people. I mean, when you're making flesh gardens and stuff, you're not great. But another interesting thing that kind of sets the Ayleids apart is they knew how to harness starlight. Which, from our Gods video, you know the starlight and the stars, the light they give off is not just starlight like it is in the real world. It's raw magicka.
Pretty raw powerful magic. Raw magicka.
Yeah. Which is where you get alien artifacts like your alien wells that can boost your vitality. Your Welkin stones. Welkin stones are the big one. Because Welkin stones were like batteries. They stored starlight. And in every game that the Welkin stones are in, Skyrim and Oblivion included, if you use one on your character, it fully restores your magic. Doesn't matter how much magic you have. So they're essentially conduits for raw magic. And the aliens knew how to collect it, which is interesting because no one has figured it out since. So that's something that's interesting about the aliens. But the thing is, you can't get too much in with the aliens unless you're ready to talk about the Imperials and Saint Alessia and stuff, which we'll have to get into later. So
yeah, because they're both tied together pretty heavily, hence why I'm just kind of sitting here thinking of doing only a general overview of all of them.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, we do have a few things that we need to blast out of here. We do have the Kendemi Velothi, which is a tribe over down in Black Marsh, where the fun lizard people live. And I gotta say, the wiki for this entire tribe is only one paragraph, and that's impressive. That's how little we know about them. And it is completely
they're not
great.
in any game either, so... Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that because I don't know that race either. Like I said, my expertise comes when we talk about the men races.
They were a group of Mer that inhabited Black Marsh, along with the Barbassi aliens, which were an offshoot of the aliens that escaped from Imperial rule, and actually survived until about right before the Imperials said, oh, hey, look at that, there's some more aliens, let's go kill them. And then making the city that followed Meridia the last alien stronghold in all of Tamriel.
Yeah.
But the Valafi survived until about the second era in the 500s when the Canathan flu started going around. And
Canathan flu killed a lot of races off.
And it killed, like, it killed everything but one Thingy tribe. Like, it killed them. It probably killed a lot more of extinct races that we don't know of.
It technically killed the Kathringi tribe. We can get into that later, though.
It killed the Orma, which was another tribe of men. Well, it finished them off. Because there were a few left before that happened.
Yeah.
I say while we're talking about kind of more obscure races, we hop into the left-handed elves real quick.
That is true. I was about to do that.
Because there's not a whole lot on them either. We just know what we know because of the Red Guards. Fun enough, this is a tribe of elves that have beef with the Red Guards. Elves just have beef with men no matter where they are. But, yeah, so they're from the same continent the Red Guards are from. When the Red Guards came over, they left the left-handed elves back on their continent. The left-handed elves are, as far as we know, golden-skinned elves as well. But what sets them apart is they're incredibly skilled at swordsmanship. Where your high elves and a lot of your other elves are more magically inclined, they are swords masters. Which is kind of cool, because it's different.
And there's also a couple of things here where the Yakuden / Sinistral War kind of actually had the Yakudans being enslaved for a pretty decent time, all the way back in the Malefic era, at least from what we've heard from the actual books from Yakuda. And they apparently had a empire 4 times the size of the empire on Tamriel, which, with what age they're talking about, it was probably the first dynasty, the Alesan one, that had pretty much almost all of the north of Tamriel, except for Morrowind, like High Rock and all that. So that's a pretty big empire. Like,
yeah.
Damn. You would have to put land between the Somerset Isles and all of Daggerfell just to have that much land for a continent.
Yeah.
That just shows you how big that potential continent was, even if it was just a flat lie. Because that was just gigantic desert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they could have just over-exaggerated.
Pretty crazy. But we don't know a bunch about them. That's the problem. That's the problem with some of these races. You have your 9 main races and everything else we don't know a ton about. But we know of them. We just don't know a ton about them. But
I wish we knew more.
Moving on from there, we should probably talk about ye old Timer, because Timer aren't around right now technically, even though they are, but they're not. Because the Timer turned into a completely different race. So they were part of the...
That's why they're called the changed ones.
Yeah, they were part of the Aldmer that originally come over from Old Aldmeris, and they didn't like the way the High Elves were doing things, so they left. Following which 3 people? Or which 3 gods, I guess.
Lucille?
No, no, they're not around yet. No, they followed Mathala, Boethia, and Mathala, Boethia, and what's the third one? Azura.
I was about to say Azura.
Yeah.
The Boethia, Mathala, and Azura. The 3 Daedric princes are the ones who led them out of Aldmeri. The Aldmeri territory, not Old Aldmeris. They were already on Tamriel when they did this. This is also where you get Saint Valafi. He was the leader of them during that time. But yeah, so they were the Chimer. These are the Dark Elves we're talking about. These are Proto Dark Elves. The Chimer. They were gold skinned just like the High Elves. until they pissed off the gods because they did a bad thing.
Yeah.
They specifically pissed off Azura. That's who did it to them.
Long story short, we will get into this other race that we're talking about in a bit, but the Dwemer, they decided to shun all religion, and
All
they
of it.
got super powerful to the point where the Chimer said, okay, we need to deal with this. So they started a war and started just kind of fighting back.
And little did they know, a Tonial architect by the name of Kagernak had figured out a way to tap the heart of a dead god.
And not only that, but he was trying to power a gigantic mech. This is getting real mech warrior in here.
Yes.
By that same heart. And if he would have done that, oh man, it would have caused a dragon break. But oh man.
It would have, when it was powered up eventually, it caused the dragon break. Because the Numidium has been activated once that we know of. So this giant mech is, so the Dwemer, the Deep Elves, this is the race that we no longer have, but we probably know the most extensive amount about of the races we don't have. Because they left their bastions underground for all of us to explore and a lot of us to die in multiple times. And
two very over-leveled enemies.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, also one of the things is before the Chimera made their movement, the Dwemer settled there first, but they settled underground.
Yes.
And
yes, that's true.
Chimera,
the Dwemer was there first.
Yeah, and the Chimera did not know this when they moved there and ended up, well, the Dwemer didn't care about anyone but themselves, so you can imagine what happened.
Well, they came to an uneasy alliance first. And then when the Dwemer or the Chimer found out they were trying to tap the heart of Lorcan, it kind of caused a little war that broke out. And and let's just say it ended with the Dwemer disappearing. They Kagernak tapped the heart of Lorcan, did something wrong, I would pretty well suspect. And every Dwemer keyword on Tamriel disappeared. Don't know where they went.
So there's one left.
There's one, and he doesn't show back up till Morrowind, which is another 1,000 or so years.
Yeah, but the dude's great. You gotta admit that.
Yeah, because he was in Oblivion when this happened, while they were fighting their war, and Kagernak tapped heart.
We don't know which realm, but it was Oblivion.
Well, this ended with two things happening. The Dwemer disappeared, and the Chimer became the Dark Elves because four Chimer decided to try to become gods. 3 of them succeeded. One of them is no longer elf or mortal or god. He is somewhere in between. Because they kind of screwed him over, if you read the lore. He kind of has every right to be mad. But, of course, I'm talking about the current in this game, Dark Elven gods, Sothasil, Almalexia, and Vivek. And then their other counterpart, all the way from the Lost House of Morrowind, because Morrowind has houses, ruling houses.
Yes, Dagoth.
Dagoth or House Ur. They kind of screwed him over. You can read the lore on that. He got a lot of the power, but is not much of a person anymore. Where Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil literally ascended to the equivalency of godhood. A lot of the Daedra still make fun of them and call them, half-gods or halflings. Specifically, Mephala has beef with it, being one of the gods that they replaced when they became gods. So what happened is they tapped the heart of Lorcan correctly, because Sothasil's a freaking genius. And probably the most mentally stable of the 4, if you count Dagoth. He knew how to tap it, tapped it. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil ascended to godhood. They have all the divine powers. They can create pocket realms. Clockwork City is one of those.
And in the
Which is
fourth
worse.
era is actually still alive even after his demise. From some
Yeah.
lore that we got from the Blades of all things.
Yes. So funny enough,
And the card game.
yeah. Funny enough, when you do the Clockwork City questline in this game, Sotha Sil pretty much tells you he already knows he's going to die. As such, he has created fail-safes so that the Clockwork City remains even after he is no more.
And he said, okay, cool. I'm gonna die. The only way I can power this entire city is the Heart of Lorkhan, and I don't think that's gonna be around too longer, so, screw it. I'm gonna make my own!
Yeah.
And he does!
Which comes into the fact that that's how
This dude's a smart bastard.
And Sotha Sil ticked off the original 3 gods that the Chimer worshipped. And in doing so, made Azura mad, and Azura said, now you're going to look ugly. I'm going to make your skin look like ash. So, which is where we get the Dark Elves now. Which is cool, because if you look at Vivek, Sotha Sil, and Almalexia in this game, their skin is still golden. They're not ashes-skinned. Because they had enough power to fight off Azura's magic, I guess.
Except for Vivek, right?
Vivek is golden-skinned.
He just decided to paint half of himself.
Vivek's a maniac.
He's weird.
Probably deserved to perish.
We don't talk about him painting half of his body.
Yeah. So the blurb that Sotha Sil gives about Vivek is Vivek being a poet. He wants to be everything at once. Every gender, every race, every possibility. And that's why Vivek has so many of his sermons are just off the wall, nuts bonkers. Because Vivek is not mentally stable. Even in this game. And he's even
everything at once.
Yeah, and he's even less mentally stable whenever we roll around.
He wants to be the Matrix.
Yeah, essentially.
He wants
Sotha
to
Sil
be,
is actually
he's not
living
going
in
to
the
be the
Matrix. So, so that's how you get your Dark Elves. And Dark Elven Society, secret murder is legal. Hiring hitmen to kill people is legal. That's why we don't have the Dark Brotherhood that operates in Morrowind, or rather, it is the Morag Tong. Which we can get into the debate about which one is more brutally efficient. But the Morag Tong are still, they're paid killers. They are. But they carry, the difference between them and the Dark Brotherhood is they carry legal writs of execution. So if they catch you slipping and they got your name on their record, they'll kill you. Because it's illegal, as long as they have that writ of execution on them. Which is how a lot of house troubles get solved. That's how. So the Dark Elves hate each other. Funny enough, they don't agree with each other. So instead of full-out house wars happening, that is how they settle disagreements, as they hire people to kill their opponents.
Depending on how much you pissed off the other house, it will be done in public as well, in front of the guards, and the warrant will be shown right as it's being done, pretty much.
Yeah.
And the guards can't do shit about it.
Nope. Briefly, I want to go over the big houses, at least. We talked about House Dagoth. Don't exist no more. Technically. They exist in secret, as we learn in one of the dungeons, but you can only take that kind of with a grain of salt, I guess. You have House Redoran. Very stoic house. Very powerful house. They are around even when Skyrim comes around in a few thousand years. They are who owns Solstheim. They are the ones who run Ravenrock. They are a very, very honor-based house. You have Enderil. Enderil being the guardians of the temple of the 3 gods. Vivek, Amalexia, and Sotha Sil. They are your priest warriors, essentially. So when the 3 fall, they just repurpose themselves and become priest warriors from Mephala, Boethia, and Azura. So they're still a house in Skyrim. Although a lot less more powerful, because they kind of lost some credibility. When the 3 gods they defended kind of weren't gods. So
Yeah, and they kind of just, died.
Yeah, yeah, which you can kill a god. It's just not supposed to be that easy. But then you have
Ask
Telvanni.
Hayes Mora. We're gonna...
Yeah, right. Then you have the Telvanni. Telvanni is, I would be willing to put money on probably the most powerful house, but they don't care. They're not after power in that sense. They want magical power, not political power. They are your typical MMO power hungry mages. And one of the few houses that will off each other to gain power in the house. Like Rotorin, you don't hear about them offing each other that often unless it's like a dispute on honor. No, Telvanni often hire the Morag Tong to off each other. Fun fact about Telvanni, though, people say, oh, they're power hungry, oh, they're freaking dark elves, oh, they're racist. Telvanni's the only house that'll allow non-dark elves to hold positions of power. Because in House Telvanni, power speaks. Not money, not being political. If you're a powerful mage, they respect you, which is really cool.
And you could also make the kind of assumption that if they actually found a Dragonborn, they would have been like, okay, we respect you.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly because you could kick our asses without trying.
Of course, you would have to prove yourself first, just like you have to do to Neloth and Skyrim.
I know, but you just shout in their face.
Yeah, they're a prove you're strong, then we'll respect you house. Which is cool, because even in Skyrim on Vardenfell, we do a lot of dealings with a Argonian slave at one of the Telvanni places. And she is so underhanded and so good at magic. By the time you finish that quest line, she is part of the house speakership, which is impressive. So even the slaves can move up if they play their cards right, which is really cool.
It pretty much the equivalent of Orc proving himself in combat or Nord proving themselves in combat. The House Telvanni does it through magic.
Yes. Then you have House Dress. House Dress is also still around in Skyrim, though as a shadow of its former self, because slavery being outlawed and relawed so many times. Technically, right now in this game, slavery is outlawed, but as you know, House Dress still operates. They are the slavers. A lot of their insignia has chains on it. That's literally what that house runs on, slavery. Mostly Argonian slavery, as we'll get to a little later. Then you have House Slalu. House Slalu currently in this game is the most powerful house politically, because they share ties with the Imperial City. So, when the Imperials thrive, they thrive. Which then eventually leads to their downfall following the Oblivion Crisis. And at the time of Skyrim, they are no longer a house. They went from being the greatest great house to not being a house at all, which is interesting because right now they hold the most money, the most power, the most territory. Territory is another big thing that the houses hold. So yeah, you have right now, they are the top dogs of all the houses.
And even if we talk about Skyrim Age, in their whole territory, most of that territory is being sieged out by Argonians that are kind of pissed about the entire enslavement thing for a long time.
And what was left over was taken over by the new Great House that we know about in Skyrim, that we barely know anything about, but we know they're there because Neloth mentions them, and we have cards in the card game with them on it, and that is House Sadris. So interestingly enough, when a great house falls and another great house steps in, a lot of times they fill the same role that house did. So Hlaalu, you would think they were very good at trade, so House Sadris must be great at trading. Well, that's not really what Hlaalu was good at. If you talk to any Hlaalu in this game, you will realize very quick they may be tradesmen, but they are shady. They are spies. They have spies everywhere. Why? How do you think they get such good deals and can fluctuate markets? So House Sadris, we think, is a spy network kind of house.
That's kind of what they look like, at least.
Yeah.
From all the artwork, yeah, I would be surprised that they weren't.
Yeah. So, uh, so yeah, that's your great houses right now and future, and a couple in the past that have fallen. So Hlalu's right now in ESO. They're here. Won't be for much longer. About another 1,000 years and they're gone, like completely dissolved. So that's all our elves, except for a couple. There are a couple more. We talked briefly on the Dwemer, which there's so much lore about the Dwemer. You could do a deep dive on them for hours. They're crazy.
But we can talk of, you know.
You could make an entire video for the damn Ethereum Wars
Mm-hmm.
in what they did to the Snow Elves.
Short recap story of the Dwemer. They said, we don't like your gods. We're going to use logic. And we are going to tap the heart of Lorcan and poof out of existence. And that's the recap. Yeah. But to be fair, they were probably, and still to this day, probably the most advanced race. And it's not even close. They were making robots that ran on soul gems back before the Nords came back to Skyrim. So the Dwemer are pretty crazy, and I would think if you want to learn more about them, just do a deep dive on the Dwemer. There are plenty of good channels out there that do deep dives into them. Yeah,
definitely.
But we should probably gloss over them a little bit because they are one of the races that are gone in this game. We can jump to the Orcsmer next, though. Orcsmer are interesting.
Oh boy, the orcs, the people who can never find a homeland because we keep destroying it.
Yeah, well, what makes the orcs different? The Orcsmer, they are elves. But, like we talked about in the gods story, their main god, Trinimac, was devoured and became Malakath. So when he became Malakath, they were twisted with him. So they went from being elves to being orcs, which are still elves, but very rarely is an orc born that has magical inclination. They are known as the pariahs, the pariah people, because they don't have a home. Every time they build Orsinium, the Red Guards and Bretons say, nah, bro, you can't do that.
Nah, you ain't allowed, boy.
But to be fair, the orcs are
even when they let them, when they're done letting them, they just destroy it again.
Yeah. To be fair, though, the orcs make up a good chunk, at least in the 4th era, and in the late 3rd era, a good chunk of the Imperial frontline troops and blacksmiths. Orcs are very martially talented. They have their orcish rage, which, funny enough, we talk about racial abilities and stuff in game. That's a racial ability that expands to the lore. Like, the lore says they have that ability. Where they can just go into, like, a war trance.
Like, they are extremely powerful in combat.
Martially, yes. Martially.
If you get the range advantage, though, they are completely effed over, because you can just pelt them with arrows.
They are your ultimate barbarians. They really are. Because you look at the two races that give them crap each time they fight. Bretons are mages, half mages, and Red Guards are nimble. So, being nimble and being a mage are kind of their two downfalls.
And they run off a war chief society.
Yes, they are. They are not a united people. They have their strongholds, and a lot of them grow up in their strongholds and never leave. You have some that are imperialized, is what they call them, where they are impolite society, I guess you would call it. And a lot of those orcs left stronghold life, and they get shunned for it, because that is the way of the orc, is you live in the stronghold life. So, yeah, that's what I find interesting about them. The fact is, if they ever were to unite and were allowed to unite and get a war band going, they could probably do some damage. But
they could at least take over a province.
And like the 3 times that they've actually gotten together, the Red Guards or the Bretons stopped it before they could get too far. Because, and and I say 2 or 3 times, that's 2 or 3 times throughout history, they disagree 99% of the time because they are each their chiefs, the chieftain society stuff. So not all of the Orcish clans agree with each other. They are united as a people, but not under one banner.
Some believe in the old god Trinimac still.
Yes, yep.
And others believe in Malekith.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the people that we find in Skyrim are Malakath. I don't think we ever find a Trinimac.
All of them are.
Yeah.
Because that's mostly down south for the remnants that are still somewhat
closer
hanging around.
To high, yeah, closer to all the Alterners. But yeah, so the orcs are kind of brief. They have history, but it's just a bunch of, hey, we want to build ourselves up, and then they get kicked back down. So I mean,
well, I mean, even if we were to go into their history, we'd actually have to do a deeper dive just to go through all the different clans throughout their history.
And that's the ones we know of.
Yeah.
And this is due to the war chief society that they live in. They end up eliminating clans, and then new clans are founded.
Yeah, they're often. Yeah. Not only do you have war chief society, you have war chief society mixed in with a lot of times they roam too. They don't stay in one place.
Yeah, like they're very nomadic.
Like in this game, the Shatul clan, they're nomadic.
Right.
So not only do you have the disadvantage of them being each ruled individually by their own chiefs, you have the nomadic lifestyle, which in the real world leads to not a whole lot of history other than verbal history.
And then once your tribe goes to war, you lose your story.
Mm-hmm. And it can also not be stressed enough. The orcs may be elves, but they live shorter than elves. Most of these elven races we're talking about, I'm talking 250 to 500 years is their average age. But wood elves being on the shorter end, dark elves and high elves being on the other end. And that can be extended through magical means. But
this is argued by the stride they take, by the way.
Yeah.
There was the god that taught the elves how to take a shorter stride for a longer life.
Yeah. So the elves live longer. Orsimer do not. Orsimer, in a lot of cases, live shorter than Nords, which is impressive. But that could be just kind of because of their war chief lifestyle. Because you have like the old orc encounter in Skyrim where he's got gray hair and he's like, I'm looking to die.
and you have even middle-aged orc in Hrothgar looking for a good battle.
Yeah, so the orcs, being as a martial race, they think it is a dishonor to Malakath to grow old and die naturally. They think you are to die in battle. That's the ultimate goal of most orcs, is to die in battle. So that's what makes them kind of different. They are elves, but they are on the complete opposite side of the spectrum from all the other elves. No magic, martially inclined, and big. They are a big race. The only race that I think is bigger than them are Nords.
And that's only some Nords. We've seen some pretty skinny Nords just because of the fact they don't really try.
Yeah. But
you're
wrapping it up.
Go to the next elf race.
Speaking of Nords,
the last elf race. And
no, technically we have 2 left.
No, they're technically the same race.
No, I'm talking about the Breton because those are half elves. I included those. I don't
count them as elves. They're human, but
that's where I was gonna go with their ancestor into the Breton.
Yeah, well, we should probably talk about the snow elves first.
That's why I was like, okay, Nordman, come on.
We did forget the snow elves.
Talk about the snow elves.
That is a race that has all but been eradicated. Because
the only snow elf we actually see in any of the games is
pure snow elf.
Only 2 of them in Skyrim, and then one that we see in Legends.
Oh, really? We see one in Legends?
Yeah, we see one in the actual card game, but it's just,
Interesting.
card, and we don't know if it's
The
alive
one-
or not.
The one we meet in Skyrim, the only one that is still a true snow elf because his brother is not, is Knight Paladin Girder, Gillider, whatever his name is. And he is a true snow elf. Probably the last one. And at that point in Skyrim, he is about 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old. But he even says that his life was extended by Oriel to carry on the chantry. So, he very well may be the last true snow elf. You may be asking yourself, well, where did the rest of the snow elves go? Well, they...
Back to the Dwemer.
well, yeah, the ones that weren't cut down by the Nords, at least. So, to talk about the snow elves, you have to talk about the Nords. Nords fled at Mora, come to Tamriel. They settled in what is now Windhelm. Or further north. Winterhold was the first place, actually. Winterhold was the first landing place of the Nords. Built the town Sarthal. And then we're like, oh, there's elves here. And for a long time, the Nords and the elves lived peacefully together. They tolerated each other. And then what is known as the Night of Tears is what kind of sparked the whole Snow Elf Nord War that ended up wiping out the Snow Elves. The Night of Tears, the Snow Elves invaded Sarthal, cut down men, women, and children. But they let the three most important ones escape. the three they probably shouldn't have let escape.
We actually kind of know probably what has caused that, because it was about a couple of months after they found a ancient artifact called the Eye of Magnus. And considering it's named after the literal architect of Nirn and Mundus, yeah, it has to be pretty powerful, hence why they kind of wanted it, even if they had to attack an entire city and kill everybody to get it.
Keep in mind, too, the elves see the men races as infants. They don't respect them. Even though they tolerated the Nords, they did not respect the Nords. And they let three people escape from Sarthal. A man named Ysgramor and his two sons. Which was probably the worst mistake in the history of Tamriel that anyone has ever made.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Okay, you can argue the tapping of the heart for the first time could also be probably one of those.
So.
But oh yeah, no, that was a major mistake.
Come out of that. Yeah,
if you're going to sack a city, do not leave survivors.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Unless that's an entire city and there's only that city of a race, don't do it. Because he's going to get some people to come back and kick your ass.
Yeah, so they let Ysgramor live. Ysgramor went back to Atmora, brought the original 500 companions. And on the way back, his son Yingal, Storm swept him off course, killed him. We can talk about that in the Nord section. Either way, Ysgramor come back and essentially crusaded, genocided the Snow Elves for what they did. Was so good at killing Snow Elves, the Snow Elves started knocking on the Dwemer's door, screaming, help, help, they're going to kill us. By the time that happened, Ysgramor had already killed all the armies of Snow Elves, and they were just genociding Snow Elf villages at that point. That's how deep they got into you screwed us, now we're going to screw you kind of thing. So the Snow Elves, a whole race of people, I'm talking like they spanned current-day Skyrim. They had settlements everywhere, which we see no remnants of because they burned them to the ground. They started seeking refuge with the Dwemer. Being elves themselves, I'm sure they thought they would help them, and they kind of did. Kind of.
They helped them, but then they made a deal with the Dwemer, and in that deal, they were told to drink a potion. They all had to drink a...
Made from a certain kind of fungus, yeah.
Yeah. And the remaining Snow Elves at the end of the war and everything, and the Dwemer are involved. Well, they just turned into the Falmer because it blinded all snow elves.
It was over a long period of time, but yes, the snow elves turned into the Falmer. Interesting side note about that, though, is we know the snow elves were very talented mages as well. Wisp mothers are thought to be snow elves, ghosts of snow elf women, because it says in the in one of the books about the return to Skyrim that Ysgramor did, that Ysgramor and his sons warred with the Pale Lady, is the name of the elf, which we know from Skyrim. The Pale Lady is actually a wisp mother. So we have a good sense that wisp mothers are snow elves. Original snow elves, mind you, not the Falmer. Because now we're on the Falmer. And that's where stuff starts getting sketchy. Because they lose, at some point, what makes them mortal. Because if you look at all your playable races in Elder Scrolls, they all have black souls. That's what sets them apart. Falmer don't have black souls.
Yeah, they kind of turned more into an actual beast race instead of an elf. When we mean beast race, we mean not beast folk. We mean actual, just straight up beast.
Very animalistic.
Like Lamia.
Which is interesting. Have we ever soul trapped a Lamia?
Well, we're not allowed to. We don't really have a game that we're allowed to do it in.
Lamia is sentient. Very much so. So, yeah, but...
They're one of the beast races that Topol actually written down.
Yeah, I'm aware. That's what makes them kind of iffy. That'd be interesting. We had a game like that one day where we could see if they're an actual race or not. So yeah, snow elves get driven underground by the Nords, become the Falmer. There are a couple secluded pockets of snow elves left. The reason that Night Paladin Gerber, I'm never going to get his name right. Either way, the reason he and his chantry escaped is because it was hidden. The Nords didn't find it. It's that simple. If the Nords found it, it would have been razed to the ground. So...
There's supposed to be multiple sanctuaries like that across all of Skyrim, and even snow elves that fled Skyrim, so there could be more sanctuaries that we don't know of in any area.
Yeah, exactly. But that's your snow elf brief history. I mean, you could get into talking about the Snow Prince, which was like their general, and all that stuff, but the short rundown of the snow elves, talented mages, like every other elf race just about, made the fatal mistake of letting Ysgramor live. So yeah. And I guess now we kind of need to talk about... Go ahead.
The last elves, the ones to enslave some needs and Nords, should we say?
The Dureni elves.
Yep, the Dureni. Well, the Dureni were a splinter group of aliens, were they not? They were the kind that felt sorry for men.
Yes and no. It's more of those mix of multiple peoples, where the Dureni elves were originally the precursor race to the Altmer, where they decided to settle there, had a nice, decent colony before any men were there, and then they took human slaves, and then they just kind of interbreeded, and said, you're part of ours now. We're not gonna be, like, super racist towards you, we're just gonna let you live with us. But you're still our slaves. And then the entire Alessian slave revolt happens, meanwhile, and some of these
Dureni become
aliens...
essential. essentially.
And then some of these aliens wanting to get away from war will either go to different parts of anywhere on the continent, or they'll be like, wait a minute, there's a sister kingdom over there of elves. Let's go ask them and see if we can just, kind of sit there and be with them. And then those start interbreeding into them because they just say, hey, come on in, more people. And it's literally just a red light district. That is their entire country.
Yeah, so the Durini became collateral of the Alessian slave revolt, essentially.
They were attacked a few times by the Alessians, believing that they were all aliens.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Durini get wiped out eventually. But they were another race of elf. They were actually fairly chill for a race of elf. One of the more chill races. So
there's still a couple of remnants over on the isle that actually has the white tower on it. And they're still there, even probably in the 4th age. We know they're in the 3rd age because we see them in Daggerfall, actually. So they're definitely still alive, but they're just kind of the most chill elf race you could ever imagine. And they're great.
This is a good segue into, well, technically there's half Durini that live here on Tamriel. And that is getting into your Bretons. Your Bretons. A lot of Bretons have Durini lines. Ties, at least.
There's even some that have alien lines, and
there's some that have high elf line too.
We actually know some in lore that are very hidden, but they're Bosmer lines as well.
Yeah. So your Breton is essentially a catch-all for the half race of men elves in the game. But they are concentrated in an area. Bretons are their own civilization at this point. But yes, Breton lines do have a lot of different elven races mixed in. The only one I would reckon to say they don't have mixed in is probably Dwemer and Chimer. I don't think we have any evidence of Dark Elves or Dwemer.
I have a plan to attack the Melmer. Send a ship at them.
Yeah.
They'll just interbreed and come back and say, oh yeah, they were friendly.
Yeah, exactly. But of your races of Elf on Tamriel, there's very few elves that have not elven ties that do not tie with the Bretons.
Just don't send any high elf ones, okay?
Yeah, right. Which is cool because the Bretons are the most magically inclined man race because they have elven blood. They live about 3/4 as long as a normal elf, but they are long-lived, which is a elven trait, and they are very magically inclined, which is another elven trait. However, they keep their traits of the men's side too, the Nedic side, and they are still very martially gifted, some of them, and they make great knights, great witch hunters, because they are a very multifaceted, talented race, because they have both the blood in them. They're mixed bloods.
Now, we gotta point out that their entire race is kind of a gaping plot hole.
Yeah.
Because we have been told multiple times, when it comes to doing the dirty, when it comes to this series, it will always go whatever traits from the mother, and that will be what causes your race. So if it was a dark elf and a high elf, and the high elf was a mother, it would have been the high elf.
The baby would look
It
high
goes
elf, yeah.
with anything. You might have a little bit darker skin from being a dark elf, but it would still be that.
The reason why they're the gaping plot hole, though, is because the Bretons are all over the place. Different tinges of skin. Some of them even still have the pointed ears. The ones that have the stronger elven bloodlines still have pointed ears.
And
Fascinating.
I really only think it accounts to how much actual interbreeding there were. Because you go from 50-50 to, oh, look at this. 70% or 80% of the actual bloodline being elven, that will slowly mix in over time. It's like how we have our old races, for example. Most of us, if you come from Europe or have Europe ancestry, you will have 2 to 3% Neanderthal in you. Or a couple of other ape-like races that our old ancestors interbreeded with. You're gonna have that in you. Because there's a couple of other ones. For example, Homo erectus was one of them. Because they were actually still alive while us humans were actually, being a thing.
Yeah, so the Bretons, they're your half breeds in this game. They're the middle ground.
And
They're half elf, half human, roughly.
And I'll point this out. I learned genetics just to figure out what the fuck these idiots were. Because they were that confusing.
And one of the things is, even with their society, like, you see the more modern society nowadays with all that, but you also have to remember that the weird are druids or Bretons.
And then you have the druid circles, yeah.
And
most
druids are
which
Bretons.
we're finding out more.
Mostly because of the fact they have a lot of ties to
nature,
the side of man, which mostly natively goes with the side of the earth bones. Then you have the elves that actually know how to use magic, so they're actually really good at... Screw you, game. Really good at figuring out those olden earth magics, making them druids in general.
Very much so. And you even have in this game out in Galen wood elves that have come to the druid circles that are learning earth magics from the druids, and these are wood elves. So I mean, literally the race built on nature magic.
Yeah, and this shows you the drastic difference between the three different societies you have. Because even the weird and the druids don't agree on the nature magic they use.
Yeah. And if you want to know anything about like streamlined mainline Breton culture, it just look to ancient England, medieval Europe.
Yeah, it's basically medieval culture. Europe.
Yeah, all petty schooling included.
If you look over at the Red Guards, which is another race in that area, it's more Middle Eastern age.
Yeah, but that kind of wraps up the Elven part of it. We've kind of hit every race, at least that I can think of.
I'm looking at all of them. We hit all of them.
Or anything like that right now? Bathroom break? We could do that, and then we can go ahead and swing back into the needs, or we can hit the Red Guards, either one.
Probably should just hit Saint Alessia first, because she's kind of the predecessor to everything that we have right now, except for a couple differences. Very, very few of the man races did not come from Saint Alessia.